How bad are your digital sermons? Probably pretty bad. You may not think so, but your viewers probably do, or at least the ones that aren't already a part of your church. We're going to fix that today, or at least Cathy Townley is going to fix it. Right, Cathy?
That is just really, I'm telling you, that's a lot to put on me to fix that. Are you sure? I've never been called a fixer
today, aren't
yeah,
you?
right, I guess
You're the
so.
sermon fixer.
Yeah, I'm
right.
going to, yeah, the tell-all book is coming.
All right, maybe we built this up a little bit too much. Cathy's going to help us with some tips and tricks. Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek, and I'm the leader of the Reach Movement team. We're building a movement of churches that grow and multiply. Welcome back to our second digital worship coach, where once again, we're trying something here new at Reach Resources. We're letting you sit in on a digital worship coaching session with Cathy Townley. Cathy is the worship coach and consultant. She's also the author of several books. Let's see if we can get those on the screen here. It'd be helpful if I was ready with that, right? Missional Worship and Building Worship Bridges are her two books. We hope you already sat in on our first digital worship coach back in August. That's where Sycamore Creek, yours truly, sat in the Coach E chair, and Cathy just let me have it. Well, she was kind and gentle. We talked a lot about how we can become clear in communicating service information, so there are no questions in anybody's mind exactly where and exactly when worship is. She found like our Achilles heel, friends. I mean, our website's a mess. So we talked also about simplifying the announcements, the important role of the digital host for each service. And if you missed that, be sure to circle back to the Reach Summit Facebook page and check it out. For our third and final digital worship coach in October, Cathy's going to be with Pastor Matt Bestay of Valley Church in Allendale. We'll be talking about how to improve the digital services after Matt has delivered an awesome sermon, because he's watching this right now, right? Is Matt out there? Matt, give us a shout out if you're watching it, because we're going to talk about after the sermon next month. We'll also talk about how churches can follow up and continue with digital ministry when the digital worship service is done. I know what you're thinking right now. You're like, well, what about today, Tom? What about today? Well, we welcome Pastor Stephanie Norton of Hartford, Michigan UMC. She is in the hot chair today. Hartford is nestled into Van Buren County. That feels like bridges over Van Buren County or something. Isn't that like, wasn't there a movie about that or something?
Bridges over Van Buren County?
Yeah, there you go. Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
All right. It's a congregation of about 250 people, open and friendly. And lately they've been hosting a farmer's market in their church parking lot. That sounds awesome. It's like church to farm to table. That could be a new movement instead of just farm to table. So Stephanie, we welcome you, brave soul, onto this webinar. Thank you so much. Give it up for Stephanie in the comments, because you're probably just glad you're not here in her place. Stephanie, really, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, thank you for going first, Tom.
We are also joined by the illustrious Dave Wassinger. He's not only a partner of Sycamore Creek, but he's also a video producer for Lansing Community College. Dave is our resident tech expert, offering ideas and advice, answering all of our techie questions about the gigawatt of resophilobytes thingamathings. You know what that is, right, Dave?
Oh, yes, definitely. Most definitely.
He's also teaching his kids at home right now. So if little children come into the screen, you know what that's up.
Yeah, this is a grace-filled environment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Especially
if you are watching on Facebook right now, please take a moment and like our page, share this webinar so that your friends, your church members can have the opportunity to join in too. And don't forget that you can post questions in the Q&A in Zoom, or you can also post them in the comments on Facebook. Our Reach Resources executive producer, the fantastic Leslie Schneider, who wrote this script? Leslie. We'll be following your questions and moderating the Q&A later in this webinar. So Before Cathy and Stephanie go to town, so to speak, Cathy, I think we ought to hear just a little bit about the way that you think about digital sermons or sermons in general. What should every pastor's goal be with a sermon, and how does that play out? Like, let's just talk about the sermon before we get to Stephanie's specific situation.
Yeah. Well, there's really a couple areas that a sermon has to really be sharp on. One is content and one is delivery. And, you know, I was talking with Stephanie before. She's actually got a great delivery, and some of the content stuff was off, but I was engaged by her because of her delivery. And what I find in a lot of places is both delivery and content can be challenging. And the content, for the most part, in most churches, is just not relevant to people's lives. And it is also not getting to the point quickly enough. Because the way that people are online, I mean, as we discussed last time, it's just not, I mean, you've got a few seconds, you've got somewhere between 3 and 7 seconds before somebody shuts you down. So if you're not
about
engaging,
those that 8-second pause where you can before you can hit skip commercial on YouTube. Like the commercials have become like, they got 8 seconds for you to not hit that skip thing. Is it 8 seconds on a sermon?
So I think it's probably 7 or less.
7 or less.
And so and it's so different because most what we've been hearing for so long is when people come into our buildings, we have 7 minutes, and it's not like that online. You know, people are going to make up their minds before the pastor ever gets up to preach the sermon in the building.
Well, there's a way when you're in a building, like you've committed to it, you're there.
Yes,
and you're probably going to stick with it even if it's bad.
Yes, but
online, you're just boom in and out.
And people make up their mind really before the pastor ever gets up to speak about whether or not they're coming back. And online, you know, I think people are just really after content. They are after hard-hitting, relevant, meaningful content that actually makes a difference in their lives. That's what they're searching for. And I mean, like the vast number of people that are searching for online worship, you know, it's hundreds of thousands of people every year. So
what you're saying reminds me of one of the pastors that I interned under in seminary. He said you can do either, you can either focus on clarity or connection in a sermon, and it's hard to do both.
Yeah.
And he said if you're going to err in one way, focus on err towards connection.
Yeah.
Which, you know, in seminary, you're like really trained to focus on clarity, like be clear, say the right things, get the Bible exegesis right, theologically right.
Yeah.
The connection is like the secondary thing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, like I just went and looked at a church that I've been coaching, and they did everything that I told them to do, but the connection piece wasn't there. And it was just, it kind of all fell flat, you know. And so that is a pretty important piece. But I did focus on content with Stephanie because I thought that was the place where she probably needed to improve the most. I mean,
yeah, we're going to see something actually really cool. I've never seen this before. You took Stephanie's like first 2 minutes of her sermon.
Yeah.
And then you had her rework it. And so we're going to see the before and after. This is like a makeover show.
Right. Yeah. The digital worship makeover kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, those, you know, and I've worked with Stephanie for about a year now as coaching her, and she's actually a really good preacher, got a lot of biblical content and everything, but that just shows you how different online is, and, you know, your ability to actually look into the camera. And I took a radio class one time when I was in college, and they said something about, you know, you have to actually look directly into the camera and not shift your eyes, because when you shift your eyes, people look at the shifting, not radio, but TV announcing. And so they want to trust somebody, you have to have a steady gaze.
Steady gaze. Yeah.
So
in the past few weeks, you've studied some digital sermons at Hartford UMC.
Right.
You've zoned in on 3 key pieces of the sermon puzzle for Stephanie to work on.
Yep.
The title and introduction of the sermon, the coaching process for understanding how to work with a team, and the structure of the sermon.
Yeah.
So we're gonna kind of hand the reins off to you, the steering wheel off to you, to talk to Stephanie now about those
Yeah.
3 things.
Yeah. Well, let's, I think, this would actually be a good time to show that intro of hers. And we had that chart, but I don't think we need to show that chart right now, just because I think we kind of discussed some of the pieces of it. So if we start out with Stephanie's, it's a 2-minute intro, so don't panic. We're not showing the whole, the whole thing, but just where she, so I think it's the slide before that one.
Here we go. This is her opening 2 minutes of her sermon before working with you on it.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Pastor Stephanie. Again, I welcome you to worship this morning. We are looking at the harvest season and examining what fruits have we produced this past year. I know a lot of people here in our church and in our community have all sorts of beautiful gardens or we're visiting orchards. And here in Southwest Michigan, boy, it is a beautiful time to be outdoors. It's a beautiful time to see all of the labor that we've put in to gardening and to farming finally come to fruition. And even in Southwest Michigan, we've got all sorts of orchards and lots of gardens out here. You'll see beans, carrots, tomatoes, all sorts of things just ready to get picked. And I want to look at what have we as Christians produced this year? What do we have to show for ourselves? So, and that might be a tough question. So the scripture that we're going to examine today, I want you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 7, and it's just a short segment, Matthew 7 verses 15 through 20, and Jesus has something to say about the fruits that we produce as Christians. And so he says this. He says in Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 20, he says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits." Now, those words can either be really encouraging or condemning.
Okay.
So what were you thinking about, Cathy, as you were watching that?
Yeah. Well, so I watched the entire sermon, so it was about 12 minutes long. And, Stephanie is we've had so many conversations about this, but it still is not going to be easy to hear. I mean, the sermon was just kind of all over the map is what I thought. And, one of the things that really struck me was I wondered what she's doing with the team and what kind of input she's getting and what kind of clarity she has actually going into the process. So if you wanted to show that next slide, that would be actually helpful. That'll kind of give us a look at what I asked her after I watched that whole thing. And by the way, we had one of the things we've been working on is technology at her church. And if you actually watched that sermon on YouTube, it was much cleaner and clearer. We had so much difficulty actually downloading it and transferring it and stuff. So it kind of lost some of that in the translation. But you did get to hear the point. So that's what I asked Stephanie. I said, what's your single point? And Stephanie, I don't know if you want to chime in here. But yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I tried to distill that 12-minute sermon down into one sentence, which it was hard, and I think the fact that it was hard revealed that it wasn't well thought out. So I wrote to Cathy, some years you thrive, and other years you just survive, and that's okay. We should think long term.
And so when I read that, it was a complete disconnect from what Stephanie actually preached about. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is what I asked Stephanie. I said, what did you speak about most in your message, and what did you say repeatedly? What did you want them to do? So go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah. So the whole point of what we do is that our job is to make disciples, and when we do that, to transform the world as we do that. But in stepping back for a moment, to look at that, I could feel it didn't make that connection,
Right. So that was really the point that I had gotten out of her message, was that she was trying to help people see, as a Christ follower, you can still bear fruit even in a bad period of time. And so if you want to go to that next slide, this is what I was trying to say to her is, like, if you compare the point she said she wanted to make, which was some years you thrive and other years you just survive, what I would expect to be getting out of that, of a message that was trying to make that point, is something about, okay, give yourself a break. This is a tough year. We're having a tough time. She said a lot of that stuff in the intro. And it isn't that that stuff isn't important, but it wasn't really the heartbeat or the hook or the main thing that she was really trying to get across. So I asked her to rewrite her. So it was like, just backing up a second here, either I was going to say to her, you're going to have to rewrite the entire sermon to match this, statement here, or rewrite the statement to try to get out of what you're out of your message, what it is you really want to get out of it. So if you go to that next slide, then that's what we did, was to rewrite it. And I rewrote it because I was trying to just do it for myself. And that actually resonated with Stephanie, that Christians are always Christians. And even in a bad year, we can still produce the fruit of the Spirit by making new disciples. So Stephanie, when you and I talked this through, you had some pretty, I would say, insightful comments about the difference between this statement and the other statement. I hope you remember what you talked about, because they were really good.
I hope I do too. I felt like the first statement, the sentence that I wrote to you, that it was something like a sweet platitude you could tell somebody, but there really wasn't any gospel in that sentence. Like, just it's a hard year for everybody. Just keep your head down, keep going. It'll be okay. But where do that's not helpful in a biblical way. That's not helpful in as far as transformation and relationships. So I appreciated working with you. It was helpful in that we could talk about our Christian identity.
And I think the other piece of that is that the point that you're trying to make ought to inform the entire sermon. Mm-hmm. It's like whatever the message is that you're trying to get across, it should be, and I guess, to Tom's conversation about you can't be clear and relational at the same time. I don't think that's really necessarily true. If you can have this point of clarity and it can come out very quickly, you have a much better chance of engaging people. And I mean, this is another piece of the pie, and I don't know how to put my finger on it. But the first intro that you did, I really felt was geared very much to all your people. And it was not something I could fit into. Mm-hmm. And when we did the redo, I was able to fit into that. And, this is, I think, something that I see church people do all the time. Pastors, is they are speaking just to their own people, and they're not thinking about the mission field. And I think if you can flip that, if you can speak somehow to the mission field, you're going to capture your people, because those needs are across the board, what's going on in everybody's life. So if you want to flip to that next point there, that next slide. And this is where I think the whole team process really comes to play. Is we discussed your team process, and that's where I discovered there's a missing piece in your team process. And this opens up another doorway to an entire conversation. I mean, Tom said you have about 250 in your church, but that's membership, right?
That's
and
membership.
You really have about, prior to COVID, you were getting about 70 in worship?
I think between the two services, like 100.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So, the role that you play, chief cook and bottle washer, that's the, so trying to do this too. I mean, so let's talk about that just for a second here. But tell us about your team process and what we discovered you were not doing.
Sure. Yeah. So in the team process, I think we probably have started doing that just in the last few months, where it's assembling. What I've done is assembling 3 teams of 2 each.
Yeah.
And I'll join that team, and we'll discuss like the felt needs in our church, in our community. Just and especially in light of COVID and race relations and things like that. Topics generate pretty easily out of that. And so we would previously, we would get together and talk these through. Now we're just texting and emailing, so there's not as much face-to-face contact. But we would talk about well, what are you guys hearing, and how are you feeling? And we would just talk about where people were at, how they were feeling, what's going on in the world. And that would generate, sermon series that I would preach on.
So I think that's actually really good. And I just know from doing this, as long as I have done this, you've seen one team process, There's really not one right way to do it. I think you have to find your footing. When we hear your team process, Tom, it's so completely different, than what Stephanie has done. And but it works. It's got to work for you. So, but I did ask, so the question that I asked you was, then I said, well, what are you doing to preview your sermon before you actually give the sermon? And the answer to that was, you weren't doing that.
So that reminds me, that is a big part of our team process at Sycamore Creek, is we preview the sermon 2 weeks before we preach it.
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, we're moving towards 3 weeks here shortly, because we're going to start to preview in 3 weeks, film and week 2, and edit in week 1.
Yeah.
But basically what I saw you doing there, Cathy, with Stephanie, was being a team person to help her clarify that point.
Yes.
And of course, if you're going to preview it 3 weeks ahead of time, or 2 weeks, or even 1 week, you have to put some work into it, and then you have to come. Stephanie's being very non-defensive right now.
Correct.
You have to come to the preview ready for somebody to say, I don't get what's the point of your message?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then oftentimes, at least in our process, like somebody will say, I think the point of your message is this.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, light bulbs, yes.
Yeah.
And then you go and you rework it, and you just, it's sometimes it's not even, it doesn't even take it's not like you had to scratch the sermon. You just take that one phrase and you say, that is it. And then you work it through the whole thing.
Yeah. When I was on staff at a very large church, I was director of church planting there, but we used to talk about having an unoffendable spirit. And, but that's really tough to do. But that's, if you can give it up, all of this, just as a worship leader for so many years, and an artist, an artistic type of person, you throw yourself into your work, and it's really hard to separate from it. And yet that's what God is really asking us to do for the purpose of the gospel.
That's not something I think that we're taught in general as pastors. And I remember we also do back pre-COVID, we had 2 services. We would, in between the services, critique this first service to hopefully make the second service better. It wasn't like we were trying to have a dress rehearsal be the first service, but there's always room to improve.
Sure.
And some of that was the sermon, and my worship arts guy was very open. We built a culture very open to him, like saying whatever he thought about my sermon, good, bad, and ugly. And we had a guest person in, one of our denominational officials in, and Jeremy didn't know that you're not supposed to do that with denominational officials. So he just told this person straight up what was not working in his sermon. And then I got, it circled back to me eventually, who does this guy think he is? Well, that's the culture we've created at Sycamore Creek, is constant evaluation.
Right. Well, and what this ought to really do is, clearly it makes it better, it makes it sharper, it makes it more engaging, but it should show you then the kinds of things that would matter to talk about. So one of the things I asked Stephanie is, why did she choose that scripture passage? Because it's not a usual passage that you would hear about, bearing good fruit. Well, you would, because it's about bearing good fruit, but it's it's so deeply layered. It's well, are you going to talk about false prophets? Are you going to talk about, what are you going to really talk about? Where do you zero in on that? And Stephanie, why did you choose that passage?
Yeah, I think, I picked that one. I had started in on a series where we talked about, I think the one previous was Jesus says, I'm the vine and you're the branches, remain in me, stay connected, and you stay alive and you'll bear fruit. I think part of it came from that. And so it was an extension.
Yeah.
And another was, again, circling back to, the felt needs, things that were happening locally in our community that people were touching on. But
well, it should really reveal, I mean, that type of process should really reveal some of those deeper questions, like, well, what does that scripture passage say about being a Christ follower, even in dark times, and it's like in dark times, I mean, I had this one guy say one time, if you were driving a car, would people know you were a Christian? It's like if you got cut off in traffic or something like that. I mean, it's really that kind of thing, because in a time like this, a pandemic didn't take away all the other stuff that's happening in our lives. I mean, It's just, we're still struggling with loss and that's what I think you're kind of driving at. So that's where the whole structure of the message comes in, is in this team process. And then the other thing that I think is really critical to understand is that, all of this is about making new disciples. And the way that you're doing that when you're working through a team process like this is you give away so much of your own power as a preacher to the people that are on your team. What you're doing is you're growing them. They're getting deeper in their biblical knowledge. And, at the core of worship changes in a church is culture change. And, this is like layered everywhere, so if you can create culture change in all these places, you wind up much stronger. But here you are in a church of, 70 to 100 in worship and trying to figure out how do you manage all these things. I think this is very, very, very difficult. You don't give up all the things that you have had to do. You're adding all these new things. And that's what makes this so hard.
Yeah, I think, the temptation is just to do what you've always done because it's what you already know how to do.
Yeah, right.
And then you have to invest the time and energy into learning something new, which right now, I think pastors are doing. It's like I've accumulated 10 years of continuing education in 1 week.
Yeah.
Why do I want to relearn or learn something new?
Yeah.
But long term, it would be a much better strategy to pull people on board. And you are, as you said, discipling in that way when you get other people on a team.
So I think there's another chart to show. I think we could show that chart now. That is the next slide, because I think what you said, Stephanie, is that this helped you actually simplify. And this is what I'm trying to do with the churches that I work with is, you can so here is the reality. It's like, if you stay connected to your mission field, you will have creativity in worship. If you try to be creative in worship, it'll drain you. It's the mission field that really drives all of this, because they'll tell you how to communicate. So this is what we looked in on, and this is what I'm trying to do, is help pastors actually make connections with their mission field. And here's what I asked you, Stephanie, is like, what's the purpose? I listed several possible purposes. There's probably more, but you said that you wanted to have people understand God's word and apply it to their daily living. And that your context was really understanding the felt needs of members and the felt needs of neighbors. And that you wanted scripture to impact, you wanted to have a real impact on that with people. How did you come to the felt needs of members and neighbors, and how did that influence your topic?
Yeah, again, that was with the team. So the other two people that I would consult with. I think if there's a key word for this season or a buzzword, it would be depression.
Yeah.
So many people, here in our congregation and just in our community are feeling depressed. It's something that comes into my office every single day.
Yeah.
Whereas before, maybe once a month, somebody would do that. And I know I would be asked to help out, hey, can you help out with the Boy Scouts? And I'd go, it's just one more thing to do. I don't have time for it. And then I would go ask people, you want a youth group in your church? How can we work together? What are you willing to invest in order to make that happen? And there are a lot of people who are just trying to get through this.
Yeah. Stay afloat.
I don't have any more to give. I can't do it anymore. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that, in coaching you, as a coach, you take on a lot of the people that you coach. You care about them and stuff like that. So I've been concerned about you and just that you're trying to do all these things. And, that's a big part of this whole process is what do you give up? How do you manage your schedule in a way that allows you to really move on to a next level if that's what you're feeling called to do, so. But I think we'd be ready to show that other, and by the way, that line that you come up with, which is Christ followers are always Christ followers, and you can still bear good fruit at a time like this. That was the redo. Should show up somehow in that introduction as an engaging piece to really capture people's attention. So I think we could watch Stephanie's redo of that if you are ready to show that, Tom, if you don't have
when you say that, one thing I think about, I'm trying to remember, is it a George Michael, like people are people, no? So it's like, I don't know, that's where my creative brain goes to.
Well, I come up with songs all the time, but I'm sorry I didn't capture your melody there.
Oh yeah, well that happens all the time. I have to look it up on YouTube for people to recognize the song that I'm singing.
Yeah.
All right, so here we are. We're ready for this is the makeover. So
this is the makeover.
The reveal.
Yeah.
Well, if you are from Michigan, then you know how much fruit we produce, and we especially see it come September, October time. People all over the country know us for our apples, our peaches, our cherries, and Christians are called to bear fruit too, like peace, patience, kindness. And following Jesus changes us, but we all know it's been a tough year. We've lived through a global pandemic. We're seeing rioting in our country and racial tensions, and it's been hard on so many people. But maybe you still have produced fruit. And today we're going to zero in on how following Jesus changes us and how we partner with him to create disciples, how we evangelize even in tough years. So we'll take a look at that today.
Woo!
Yeah. You can see how engaging Stephanie is. She's just didn't have any problem speaking right into the camera. Lots of energy. Yep. That is huge. The energy piece and the knowing what it is she wanted to say, and actually
the metaphor being tied in with the fruit, and then the script, setting it up. He hadn't gotten to the scripture yet at that point, but it was
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I took a public speaking class just for fun. I wanted to see. And one of the things they tell you is the very first thing that most people do is they schmooze. And that's like a big no-no. It's like, because you lose like 50% of your audience like that fast.
What does schmooze mean?
Hey, how are you? I'm so glad to be here. This is Pastor Stephanie, that kind of thing.
When I was thinking about what I wanted to say today.
Yes, right. Yeah, that kind of thing. And did you see what she did? She went right into it, just directly right in. Yeah. So, yeah, it was a fun process, and lots more to do if you were going to really work with the whole sermon. But
Stephanie, what was that like to work through that process of reworking just those first 2 minutes or so?
What was funny about it was Cathy, she kind of helped me rewrite a script. And that was a redo of a redo is what you saw there. So that was the third generation of what I had made. And so in the second take, I tried to do it, and it was verbatim what Cathy had kind of helped me script. And I was reading it and reciting it how I thought Cathy would say it. And the person recording it for me said, she stopped me partway through and she goes, "That's not you."
Right.
And I said, "Well, yeah, because in my head I'm reciting how Cathy would say it, which was, maybe it's a transference issue, but it's like a lot more calm and like that
Me calm?
that cool older aunt,
Oh, thanks.
Cool older aunt.
Yeah, but
Auntie Cathy.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. But she could tell right away, that's not you.
Well, yeah. And then so Stephanie sends me that one, and I went back to her and I said, "Now, do you want to redo it? Because that was not you."
Yeah.
So yeah.
People can tell when it's authentic and genuine.
Right.
So quickly,
Something I've noticed that between the first one and the second one was even the delivery was really tight in the second one. You weren't stuttering. You weren't thinking, what am I going to think? It was obvious you had rehearsed those first couple of minutes really well.
Yeah.
You had owned them. You knew them. You knew exactly what you wanted to say. You knew how you wanted to fit it together. If you're like me, I do that. And then when I try to do it, I don't actually always get it in quite the same order, but I get all the pieces in there. And that's really clear in those first couple minutes of that second video, how tight it is compared to the first one, which felt a little bit like kind of more stuttering, more pauses, more ums, and so on.
Yeah, I think maybe something that might be more apparent in the smaller churches. I heard a rumor, Tom, that you only have to preach 29 times a year. Is that true?
I told Stephanie about our conversation.
Is that true?
Anyway.
Well, to say that I only have to preach 29 times a year is not quite right. I built a team that this year I'm only preaching 29 times, but to help another person write a sermon, those other, 21 sermons?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm doing more work with the person preaching than it would be myself, but yes.
Sure.
But that's the trend.
Preach 52 weeks and also lead as a lead pastor.
Yeah.
And if you look at, like Carey Nieuwhof, and I mean, I've read this from him, but I've seen it in so many other places. The trend is for lead pastors to reduce the number of times they preach, and you're building the team. So Stephanie, theoretically, if you are successful in team development and discipleship development, you have one of those people begin to take on sermon development. And I think you're already doing that.
Yeah. So right now I'm doing 2 sermons a week, which is, I'm having now to remember back to doing this one, and it's, I'm going, how long ago was that?
Yeah.
But the times when I do have other people scheduled, it is so nice. You get a time to renew, and you do meet with them and help them do wordsmithing.
I mean, it's demanding. I mean, there is just no question about it, which is why this is not a standalone discussion. This is a much larger discussion about the life and role of the pastor. And
well, and that's a webinar for another day.
Yeah.
Network groups, which is why the Reach Summit does network groups. In fact, if you are watching this right now and you're on our Facebook page, we'd love for you to like it and subscribe to it. We'd also love for you to post questions for us to ask Cathy and Stephanie. But we also want you to know about what's coming up on October 15th. We'll have Pastor Matt Bastay of Valley Church in Allendale on. We're going to be talking about what comes after the sermon and into the week. Coming up in October, we've got our Reach Summit. This is an opportunity for you to, spend a whole day with your team, really diving deep into a lot of these different kinds of details. The keynote speakers this year are Jake Mulder and Rach Gilmore. Rachel is the former planting pastor. The former planting pastor at the gathering in Virginia Beach. Look, even the tech guy gets it messed up sometimes there. So Jake Mulder's the co-author of Growing Young. He's going to help churches unleash the passion of young people. Both Jake and Rachel also are going to lead morning workshops and so on. Cathy, you're up to something which you're so up to it that it was invading what I was talking about. Let's watch and see. It's called R2L, Ready to Launch. Let's check that out now.
church pastors and church people, you have said, do not really have a vision of what modern worship could be. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. They develop the worship service around themselves and their own personal preference.
New people will only be able to find out the answers to their questions about Jesus in an environment that culturally matches the way they live their lives.
Whew, that got my heart racing. I mean, I think that's kind of like trying to do, like, that's sort of the feel and energy of that is what we're trying to bring into those first 2 minutes of the message, right?
Right. Yeah. So that group is a reach group, and I developed it with Gary Stepp, and I do most of the teaching. He does some, but it's a 9-month process, and we're trying to help churches revitalize or start a worship service in their building, but especially online. And we utilize a couple books, Nona Jones' book, Social Media to Social Ministry, and my book about building worship bridges, and develop teams, and actually launch a campus. And then develop the service from within that. So
I did this coaching with you, or this webinar, a month ago, and we've been trying to step up our game to add a little energy to those first 2 minutes. So you saw it, you said we should throw this in the webinar. This was our series right now called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And it was the first 2 minutes, which we ended up pre-recording and then using as a teaser to put out even before the week began, of what was coming up this Sunday. So this gives you a little feel for how you can take this and kind of nitrogen it up even a little bit further.
Right.
Here it is. Take 500. It is a truth universe.
You're not introducing yourself as Pastor Tom immediately after.
I gotta do that right after.
Yeah.
Here we go. It is a truth universally acknowledged that pastors do not talk politics in polite society. Well, I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek, and today I'm talking politics. And not just politics, but politics and religion with my good friend, Kay Sinclair. Kay, what are we doing today?
We are opening the series of I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Still Listening.
Trying to have grace-filled political conversations. Kay, since pastors don't talk politics in polite society, that must mean that you are not polite society.
I am the bane of society.
Does that mean you're my bane?
Probably.
All right, so we're starting this new series called I Think You're Wrong, But I Am Still Listening, based on a book by the same title. 2 Christian women, Sarah and Beth, wrote this book. One is on the left, one is on the right. They have a podcast called Pantsuit Politics, and I reached out to them to make a video just for us. And they made this video about their challenge, Exit the Echo Chamber Challenge, which we're encouraging everybody to do. We're going to get to it a little bit later on. But here's Sarah and Beth. So insert video right here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Sycamore Creek. It's Sarah and Beth from Pantsuit Politics. We heard that you are reading our book, and we are honored, we are grateful, and we can't wait to hear from you.
We are especially excited to hear how it goes for you when you take our Exit the Echo Chamber challenge in the book. We know this is not for the faint of heart. We know you can do it. We are just really honored that you're spending this time with us. So thank you. Even if you think we're wrong, thanks for listening to us.
That's right.
And keep in touch.
All right, I think this is the time for Dave to come on and explain how you need to hire a whole professional crew and have professional equipment and everything to do what we just did there.
Yeah, it's we have my phone number and email to plug, right? No, oh, okay. No, you don't. You can use a lot of the equipment you probably already have to get a lot of this done. You saw in the video clip, Tom was pretty much recording off of mobile devices, and I think a computer webcam, right, Tom?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, videos can easily be put together with what you technology you already have. Of course, you can, upgrade and do more and get a little more fancy with what you deliver. But the things you have with you right now are useful tools in creating engaging content that will, as Cathy says, keep you focused on your mission field and, talking to both the members of your church and those outside of your church.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you, Dave. I
Yes.
mean, the thing that I thought when I watched that intro and also the one that he did the previous week, both outside in front, I think the state capitol building. I mean, like I've seen pastors try to do stuff outside and it usually comes off really garbled and hard to follow because of the sound and the noise. How do you manage that piece? I mean, that I thought was pretty good what they did.
Yes. One of the things Tom is really good at, and I think I can only say good things because Tom is my pastor, full disclosure, and I am on his media team. But one of the things he's really good at is, you could have a great video and it can look nice, but if it sounds bad, nobody's going to watch it.
Yeah.
So with videos, audio is almost more important than the visuals that people are seeing. And in that video clip that we saw, both people had little microphones attached to them. Tom, I don't know how expensive those microphones are, but they're Bluetooth microphones, correct?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think this is about $120, $130.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought two of them, one for Kay and one for me.
So where do they Bluetooth into? I mean, what's the...
Right into your phone.
Okay.
But the one trick with these is that there's an app that you have to download. It won't record right to your native video editing or video recording. So you have to record within that app, which can be a little fidgety, this particular one. But this is only one kind that's out there.
Yeah, and there are other ones you can buy as well. I know one of the big microphone names, Rode Microphone, has this really small little block of a microphone that you can put on. They have other ones, like shotgun mics that will attach. And a lot of these will plug in through your headphone jack on your phone if you don't have an iPhone, or your adapter if you're in the Apple world like myself and cursed the day that they got rid of the headphone jack. The Rode, it's called the Rode Wireless Go. And I can try to put a link in here in the chat. And hopefully it gets over to Facebook as well. But this, a really good, really small microphone, comes in black and white options, but it's also under $200 to get. And it comes with you can, I think you can sync it up wirelessly, but also the ability to plug it in to a soundboard, to your phone, to whatever you're using to capture the video or stream.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I'm just hearing you say really that that's the same theme over and over. It's like, try to keep it simple, and don't get too complicated right away. I have a critique for you on your intro there, Tom, if you wanted.
I'm not in the hot seat this week, Cathy. That was last month. Okay, you can critique it. Yeah.
All right. Well, so, first of all, I'm not your mission field. So I don't know if what you did was really try to gear it to your mission field, but I thought that, there were parts of the intro that were really good, like starting with when you started talking about the title of the book and politics and pastors and that sort of thing. So you guys did the intro and you did the mistake. You kind of corrected the mistake that you were making. And that would sort of fall into that category of schmoozing. And it makes me wonder, do you lose people right then? Because, I watched because I was really trying to watch to critique. I mean, that was kind of part of my purpose. And it drew me in. The whole service drew me in personally, you know. But those first few seconds, I wondered if that's the part where you really want to be really sharp and, you know, start with the very most engaging piece that you have, which is the material.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're going to actually invite people to ask questions. We've got about 10 minutes here before the webinar's up. So we want to put your questions in the chat section or in the comments section. And Cathy, one of the things that was an inspiration for some of that stuff is if you just look at YouTubers and the way they're doing it, they often put their mistakes into even the very beginning of what they're doing. And so that was where that came from. But that, you know, any individual sermon, you may not make a mistake right when you start. So I was playing on that whole idea. The other piece I think when you see with YouTubers is this kind of authenticity, like not trying to like get things perfect.
Sure.
And actually the way that I've been thinking about it is when I'm in front of the camera, I'm trying to be serious and intense. But when I'm in the editor's chair, I'm actually poking fun at myself.
Yeah.
And so that's that sort of authenticity, like letting people know, hey, this is a human being as well. But any individual sermon maybe have a slightly different seconds.
I am in agreement with what you're trying to do, and the authenticity piece is pretty critical, you know, and what does that look like? And it's very subjective, you know, but I'm just saying the very beginning is the point at which you're probably going to have the most people connecting in, and, you know, to get them to stick or to, not even that you can force that. You can't really get anybody to stick, but just to put your best foot forward. Yeah. So we're all learning this stuff. I mean, nobody really knows, you know.
So Leslie, have we got any questions out there that we want to bring to
Yes,
Cathy?
we do, as a matter of fact. We have Kim DeLong. By the way, Stephanie, everyone is giving you huge kudos for being brave, for coming under the fire here today. And Kim DeLong asked is, when it comes to that really key 2 minutes, is it the 2 minutes of the sermon? Is it the first 2 minutes of the service? Or are those almost, do we need to think of those as both really key points?
Well, if you're asking me, they're both really key points. And the way we put the service together in the first webinar, and I see you do this, Tom, as well. There's like an intro to the service that actually gives a fast forward of what you're going to be doing. And then there's some stuff in between that intro and the sermon. And, you know, like somebody like Stephanie, I would say to Stephanie, take that intro that you developed for your sermon and put it at the beginning of the service and just repeat it for the sermon. Because why double up your work? I mean, if you've got all the time in the world, this is all you do, that's another thing. But I do think you could use it in both spots.
That reminds me of something. So in the sermon I've got coming up in 2 weeks, I'm not preaching this Sunday, but the next Sunday, I pre-recorded it. And as I was the very beginning of it, I realized like my really good stuff, I was kind of improvising, and then I can edit it later and like get the good stuff up front. But I'm driving somewhere, and I don't want people quite to know where I'm driving, so I got to explain some of that. But then the zingers were like a little bit later on. So I pulled the zingers up front. And again, YouTubers don't try to be continuous in their editing or continuous, or I don't know what the word is.
Sure.
So it's like the opening of a TV show where they pull like the climactic moments out and they stick them together at the very beginning in this montage scene.
Yeah.
And you just know that, I don't know how they're going to get to that argument, but they're going to get there.
Yeah.
And so you're waiting to see how it unfolds in that way. And that's a little bit of what I think you're saying. Like Stephanie could take all that work and put it at the beginning.
Right.
You don't know how you're going to get to that point in the worship service, but we know we're going to get there at some point.
Well, they do that on network TV too. They take those morning shows and they say, here's your weekend, or here's your day, or whatever, in 90 seconds. You know, then they take, that's the entire show. Those 90 seconds is the entire show.
The other thing that strikes me about answering that question is I'm curious if you have a thought on this, Cathy, but we feel like that the sermon needs to reside online independent of the worship service.
100%.
So whether you're cutting it out of the video of the full service and then reposting it, or whether you, like we're doing, we pre-record it. So it's its own independent video that you can then upload at a separate of the live worship service that you play it in. And in that case, then the 2 minutes of the beginning of the message really need to be punchy as well. Yeah. Because it'll reside independently of the worship service.
Yeah, I agree with that. And here's partly why. So I started working, I actually hired somebody to work with me on helping me understand how to market on Facebook, because it's what I'm trying to help people do. And so actually I've got a video she and I did, which I'm going to have you show the next time, but it's about how to manage your marketing and your sharing. And if you have that 2-minute punchy thing and you have an entire service you want people to see, and you have an entire sermon you want people to see, and you've got somebody in your life that you really want to share that with, it is much easier to share that 2-minute punchy thing and say, hey, if you're interested, here's where the sermon is. And they can just go right and get the sermon. And I mean, this is what we all should be doing, because this is evangelism 101, you know?
Here's how I've been thinking about it. Stephanie, did you pre-record that message and then upload it, or was that done live originally?
Oh, no, that was I recorded that. I've got a iPhone 11. Mm-hmm. And so I just recorded it as a video, and then I uploaded it to YouTube.
So there's a lot of work then after Sunday as far as how you use the internet. And the way that I've been thinking about it is, you pre-record it, you do whatever you're going to do with it, edit it, you cut the first 2 minutes off, you stick that out there as a teaser, like that shows up on Wednesday or Thursday on Facebook and YouTube. And then, you do your thing on Sunday, but I then upload and set to schedule the sermon to come live or to be available about when it'll be going on Sunday morning. And then on Sunday afternoon, I go back into the teaser and I put an end page on YouTube that points to the full message, the message by itself. And then I put at the end of the full message an end page that points to the service as a whole. So you get these, you know what I'm talking about. The end page on a YouTube video it's the thing that pops up over the video and says like subscribe, and then you can put a lot of different elements. You can put 1 or 2 videos or a playlist or whatever you want for people to go and watch next. And that way, somebody wants to share the teaser, and then it'll point them to the sermon. If they want to share the sermon or watch the sermon, then they might be interested in the service as a whole. Or you might want to put the end, like, well, what's the next sermon in the series? And it leads to that.
The thing that I'm hearing, I mean, like, there's a huge technology learning curve for most people to be able to do all these things. You're actually very good with technology, Tom. And I'd say most pastors, there's a number that are good, but I mean, it's like, how do you find somebody to partner with you to help you kind of walk through these things?
Yeah. I want to remind pastors that exegesis wasn't easy either when you first went into seminary. You worked at it and you figured it out, and you can figure this out too. Hey friends, join me in thanking God for Cathy and Stephanie, and maybe a little bit of Dave in there too. You can thank God for Leslie. She's good.
Woo, woo, woo. Thank God for Tom.
If you know somebody who could use this webinar, you'll find it on the Reach Summit Facebook page, and you can share it with them, or just share it on your timeline for others to gain some inspiration and thinking about how to make digital worship more effective and be the church different. I want you to know the Reach Movement team, which I lead, is working really hard to build a movement of churches that grow and multiply. So be sure to check out some of the resources we provide. Thanks for sitting in on our second #Digital Worship Coach webinar. And lest anybody end this session overwhelmed, let's end with this powerful reminder from the first letter of John. This is the message we have heard from Jesus and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in God there is no darkness. even in YouTube and Facebook and all the technological questions and the working and reworking, there is no darkness at all. And all who agreed said or typed or commented or tweeted or used the prayer emoji and said amen.
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 Peace, friends. We will see you next month.